This is March 19th. The topic today is Big Tech taking the globe by storm. We're fortunate to have some super presenters, and Gary Slywchuk, formerly an editor with the Edmonton Sun and has been the founder and the editor of Trimedia for some years now. So Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you. I hope everybody's read the newsletter and has an opinion to share, but you're on.
Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to say is that why Troy Media? Why were we asked to be moderator of this webinar? And we've been an editorial content provider to media across the country since 2005. So we certainly know the media from that end of it. I'm not saying I'm an expert in social media. I don't use it all that often myself. But I've put in a link to everyone in the chat where you can just click it and you'll see some of the services that we currently offer as Troy Media. And now we have 3 presentations today. The first is going to be by Doug Firby. And Doug Firby is Troy Media's president and publisher. And he was previously the editorial pages editor at the Calgary Herald. He and his partner, Lisa, own a boutique company called Big Tree Communications, where they leverage their knowledge of the media to help businesses gain exposure across the country. The second speaker is Doug Lacombe. So if we get mixed up, we'll call one Doug F and the other Doug L. And Doug is the president and founder of Communicado Incorporated out of Calgary. It's a digital marketing agency. He has over 30 years experience in media, web publishing, technology. He works with organizations to integrate traditional and digital communications with a focus on content marketing, advertising, and social media. Senator Paula Simons really needs no introduction. She's, especially if you're from Edmonton, she is a radio commentator, or she was, I believe, a radio commentator.
Yeah, they don't pay me to do that anymore. I have to serve it up for free and be grateful.
So she is a non-paid radio documentary maker, a playwright, a television pundit, a magazine writer, a podcaster, an author of popular histories, of which I've read one. But she is best known for her work as a political columnist and investigative journalist with the Edmonton Journal. So the first talk by Doug, and this may have been updated and I don't have the update, but the topics are going to be, Doug is going to talk on freedom of speech and unrestrained ability to bend the truth by using the internet and social media. So go ahead, Doug, you can start.
First of all, thank you, Perry, for organizing this event and for inviting Troy Media to be part of it. And thank you to the 2 distinguished co-panelists who gave up their time to be part of this as well. I very much appreciate it. I would like to note right off the top that all 3 panelists today are people whose careers began in newspapers and have put many years into that medium before moving at various times into the wonderful and at times bewildering world of digital communications. I think Doug Lacombe was probably the first of us to see the writing on the wall. That makes him the most astute of the 3. Journalists often talk, we were talking about this before we went live today. Journalists often talk about the old rule book, how we used to do things back in the day. And back in the day, anything that you wrote went through an army of editors. Facts were checked, often lawyers were consulted, reporters and editors were very familiar with the Libel and Slander Act. In the digital world, that rule book, as we once knew it, is gone. Laws that were written for a simpler time are still on the books. We are, I would argue, as a society, a bit at sea, ethically and legally, and we are madly scrambling to catch up. Digital tools have disrupted almost all of our institutions, and forced us to reconsider the way we approach much of what we do in our work, as well as in our personal lives. And this has created a tension that I think is at the core of today's discussion, the tension between the sacred right to free expression on the one hand, and on the other hand, the brazen abuse of that privilege to deliberately and knowingly spread harmful falsehoods. Legislators are grappling with how to control those abuses without eroding our right to speak freely. It's complex. So what I wanted to do today, as part of my contribution, is bring two recent personal anecdotes that I think illustrate, at least for me and maybe for you, some of the dimensions of the problem. Two cases. Case number one, I know a GP in Calgary who's also a community activist. We call him Dr. Bob. He believes that fluoride is harmful to humans and should never be added to our drinking water. Although I disagree with him, I totally respect his right to express his view. But what I object to are the ways in which he bends the facts in promoting his view. He makes claims he knows or ought to know are misleading and in some cases demonstrably false. I want to quote from a Facebook post that he did recently. He said, and I quote, "Fluoride is one of the most toxic substances in our world, equivalent in toxicity to lead." Well, we all know that, yes, if you take massive doses of fluoride, it will be toxic, but that's probably true for a lot of other substances as well. He also, in the same post, went on to say, COVID is a little virus. Those are his words, a little virus. And people should not grovel in fear and hide in their basements over it. He argues that our beautiful immune systems can kill this little critter with warp speed and do it much more effectively than vaccines. So here you have a Calgary GP, respected in the community, saying vaccines are stupid. We don't need them, right? In my view, this is pure BS, and it's coming from a licensed medical professional who seems to be defying medical consensus. Facebook is staying hands off with him. They're letting him have his say. Here's case number two. I recently wrote a story for a conservative publication about a woman who is named Susanna Den Boer. She grew up in communist Czechoslovakia when it was controlled by that very oppressive regime. Her experience there made her a strident anti-communist, and she's hypersensitive to any sense of creeping socialism. So you can imagine how she felt about the NDP government being elected in Alberta. She has a theory, which for the record, I don't buy, that the environmental movement in North America is being driven by socialists whose long game is dismantling the capitalist system. Paranoid? In my view, it is paranoid, but I respect her right to hold that view. But unlike Dr. Bob in case one, when Susanna posted the story that I wrote about her on her LinkedIn page and a couple of other articles, she was banned. LinkedIn wrote to her, "Your account was restricted due to multiple violations of LinkedIn's user agreement and professional community policies against sharing content that contains misleading and inaccurate information." It did give her the right to appeal. So we know, when these issues get complex, and some rules are easier than others. We can all agree that online hate is harmful and should be banned. We agree that online incitement to riot is probably a bad thing. We can agree that terrorist propaganda, violent content, child sexual exploitation, and the non-consensual sharing of intimate images should be banned. But I have some questions, and I hope that we can kick this around a little bit today. Who sets the standards for censorship? How can you tell mistruths on Facebook with impunity and yet get banned for saying something no more egregious on LinkedIn? Do we want privately held corporations to make these decisions by forcing them to moderate these postings? Can we trust government to make these decisions on our behalf? That's scary for people like me who have spent our lives being advocates of free speech. And how do we find the middle ground between free speech and potentially harmful misinformation? I know that Senator Simons is one of the legislators wrestling with these, so I'm looking forward to hearing from her, as well as from Comrade Lacombe. I will stop there.
I'm going to ban that from LinkedIn.
Gary, do you want to entertain questions before the next presenter, or you want to wait till
I think we'll wait until after the three have finished. I think it might work better that way. So Doug, you were going to, Doug Firby has thrown a lot at you there, but you were originally going to talk about how the advertising duopoly, Facebook and Google, is ripping us all off. So how do you fit all those into what you were going to say now?
Yeah, like Mr. Firby before me, thank you very much for allowing me to participate. It's great to be with such distinguished co-panelists, and a pleasure to coast out on this very thoughtful topic before my glass of wine on a Friday evening. So thanks for letting me be here. I think I wanted to carve out a space that maybe is not debated enough or is not thought of enough, and that is around the advertising space. And so, you know, I've played in both the editorial and the advertising world. As Mr. Firby said, I came from a newspaper background and a newswire background at one point, and so I think I have an appreciation for each. The old model of media, the business model, is what melted down. It's not that people had less appetite for journalism or stories or news or opinion or weather or sports. It's the money went away. And that marriage between the business model, advertising, subsidizing news, and those of us that were in the newspaper business will recognize the ungainly word news hole, which was an unfortunate way to represent that if you had enough advertising at 60%, then the remaining 40% was allowed for news stories. So a profitable newspaper typically tried to operate at 60-40. As soon as that got eroded by technology, and so there were a few things, not the least of which was the arrogance of the incumbents, the newspapers, and TV and radio. They did not see Craigslist coming for their advertising money. They did not see the automakers going to their own websites and skipping the car ads. They did not see LinkedIn and Workopolis at the time and Monster coming after the career ads and real estate ads. So those four categories, which were the revenue pillars of mainstream media, essentially they had their lunch eaten, and largely, as it turned out in that battle, it was Google and Facebook that essentially formed the revenue duopoly that caused all this to happen, or at least they rose to the top of the heap. And yes, Twitter is flailing about in the advertising space, and Pinterest is, and Snapchat, and TikTok, and everybody and their pet poodle. But at the end of the day, most of the money went to Google and Facebook. And this is fraught with difficulties. So one of the difficulties is that if you're a small business owner, a plumber, you own a restaurant or something, to navigate the technology that's required to do this kind of advertising is Byzantine. It's terrible. You sort of have to have a degree in computer science to book a damn ad. And that's just insanity. So clearly that spawns a cottage industry of people like myself that navigate all the nonsense in order to get your ad in front of somebody so that they might actually do something or buy your product. as we know from all kinds of other precedents, you know, the Bell breakup in the 80s, and the, you know, those of us of a certain age will recall, you know, getting off the phone quickly because grandma didn't want the big bill, and all that. And so, you know, competition has always been scarce in Canada in a number of areas, just because of our distributed geography and our small population. So in telephony, I spent some time at TELUS Mobility doing national marketing there. You know, you're again in one of these circumstances where we really only have 3 players. And now that Rogers is about to buy Shaw, I guess we'll have one fewer mobile competitor or upstart. So prices rise when that happens. It's just a truism of economics. And this is what's happening now, is that Facebook and Google, I think, are using predatory pricing to bleed traditional mainstream media dry, make it super difficult for small business owners to actually book ads or know if they're working, or know what's happening with their money, and are virtually accountable only to themselves. And so this is super problematic. So for example, if you go to Google after this session and you type in, you know, best pizza in whatever city you're in, you will almost certainly get an answer from Google that tries to not lead you to their website, so that they keep you within the walled garden of Google, and therefore reliant upon their advertising. So they've rigged the system to keep you in a closed loop. So this stuff is addictive. I mean, you can run ads so cheap when you know what you're doing, and you know, you can mitigate some of the risks. It's more trackable than any advertising. Back, you know, 100 years ago when I sold print ads, you know, the guy at the tire shop would be like, the ad didn't work. And I'd be like, well, if you put free tires in there, it sure as hell would have worked. So your product sucks. And that was the end of that conversation. And now we have clicks, and we have engagement, and we have conversion funnels, and technology galore. And it's actually quite stunning how complicated it's become to just sell your products, and so, or sell your ideas, depending on the case. We've had additional complications, of course, with interference in elections and issues. And so most of our clients are sort of more industrial or in the advocacy space. We don't really do much retail. So we have to register as an issues advertiser with Facebook. And that means I have to actually take a picture of my driver's license and send it to Facebook. That does not feel good. But it's the price of entry, right? Do it or don't. We just went through a situation where for 3 weeks, ads wouldn't run for a particular client. And I'll tell you, if that was in print, you know, I was the one throat to choke, right? The advertiser would be like, where's my damn ad? And that would be that. There'd be hell to pay. There's nobody to call. There's nobody to answer the phone. They don't answer the chat thing. Tough. Your ad didn't run? Too bad. We're taking someone else's money. So it's really Wild West in this advertising space. And, you know, people can kind of poo-poo advertising as a bit of a negative, but it also drives the economy. It also allows small business owners to, you know, to make a living, to draw in new customers. It's super important. And it's a 20th century quirk that ad money got married to news, and those two went hand in hand for a while, and now they're breaking up, and it is an ugly divorce.
Thank you. Paula? I think you're on mute, Paula.
Perfect jumping off point for me. I'm very happy to be with you all in a Hagen in Treaty 6 territory, but really to be in this territory because the two Dougs have laid out the case beautifully. Today is my Twitterversary. It is my 12th anniversary of being on Twitter. I got on Twitter when it was for cool kids, and it was fun. I got on Twitter when I was a columnist at the Edmonton Journal to help break the news. I used Twitter to live stream events, to live tweet events as they were happening, to tell people what was going on at the legislature and at City Hall. I used Twitter to reach out to people, to build readership, to build connections, to get story ideas. For me as a journalist, it was an absolutely essential tool. And I built readership. Twitter was the first time that really I reached an audience outside of Edmonton. And suddenly my columns were being read by thousands, and on good days, hundreds of thousands of people all across North America. And yes, it was addictive. From Twitter, which was my entry drug, I went on to Facebook, and I thought, what a wonderful place to build community. And I curated a Facebook page where I had 9,000 people who came, every day, and we had conversations about city building and how we could make a better Edmonton and a better Alberta. And it was wonderful. It felt all warm and embracing. And I won all kinds of national and international prizes for being an early adopter, for doing things that now everybody takes for granted. It's like telling people I won a prize for brushing my teeth or turning on the refrigerator, right? I say, oh, well, I used Facebook to share stories, and people go, yeah, but when I did it, it was still so new. And so I loved it. And I made speeches about how wonderful it was to, that we should have. I had a PowerPoint I went around and did called No Crying in the Scriptorium, about how we had this digital revolution, and it was going to be like Gutenberg's printing press putting the monks who made the beautiful illustrated manuscripts out of work, but that it was going to be a chance for people to break free of the hegemony of big media ownership, and it would be democratized, and everybody would be able to talk to everybody else. And for a couple of years, that was the fairy tale. But like many fairy tales, there's a dark side, and we in media made a deal with the devil. While I was busy tweeting and Facebooking and sharing my content for free and being so excited because I had so many readers, I didn't notice properly that we'd closed the classified advertising desks in the lobby of the Journal, where people took the little tiny ads, which even more than the display ads, kept the newspaper going. I mean, we talk about the car ads and the political ads, but it was all those little tiny ads where people, were selling their rocking chairs, or looking to adopt puppies, that really were the slush fund that kept the newspaper going. So while our advertising revenues were siphoned out, as Doug Lacombe has brilliantly described, something else was happening. And this was the weaponization of social media. I first noticed this about 6 years ago. Even before Brexit and even before Trump, there was starting to be this phenomenon of Russian bot farms. And I first noticed it ironically when my kid entered a competition. She and her friends from the Citadel's theater school made a funny video, and they were supposed to win based on how many clicks their funny video got. And one of the other competitors went and bought a bunch of likes from a Russian bot farm so that Russian robots were liking their video. And I thought, wow, this was a contest with no prize. And that's what somebody did. Come to the Brexit campaign and the Trump campaign, and things get far more sophisticated. I'm enough of a child of the Cold War to find it deeply ironic that the post-Soviet Union weaponized Mark Zuckerberg and weaponized Twitter to attack democracy. Uh, my story is that at one point I said something nice about Hillary Clinton just in passing on Facebook. And I got swarmed by all these self-identified Bernie bros, these backers of the Bernie campaign. And they just hounded me for days in this really nasty way. And I thought, oh, I guess people who back Bernie Sanders are not very nice. And some of the mean things I said about Hillary Clinton kind of also got lodged in my head. And it wasn't until after the election that it was revealed that many, many, many of those Bernie bros out attacking people were actually not real people at all. They came from Russian bot farms. I mean, there were always trolls on Twitter and Facebook, but they used to be real people with whom you could have a conversation. Now we don't know where they're coming from. The material we see, it's far more sophisticated. You can't tell what's real or fake. And so the challenge for me now as a senator and a member of the Transportation and Communications Committee in the Senate, how do we regulate this? Should we? Can we? Free speech is foundational, not just to our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but to our whole idea of contemporary democracy. So there's a first question. Do we even want to try to be regulating other people's speech? Then comes the other question. These are foreign platforms, most of them based in the United States. The United States has much weaker defamation and much weaker hate speech laws than we do in Canada. So even if we wanted to regulate things, we're beholden to the Americans who have a very different system. And then you have this question of two competing evils. Who defines the badness of bad speech? It's one thing to say, well, Canada, we would trust Canadian politicians to say what is good speech and what is bad speech and what should come off social media and what shouldn't. But do you want the government of Turkey making those decisions? The government of Myanmar? The government of Egypt? This is the challenge. Once you have governments telling Facebook and Twitter what they can and cannot say, once you have governments telling TikTok and LinkedIn what's appropriate and what isn't, you may not like what other governments have to say about that. The other problem that we have is the one that Doug Firby referred to, and that is platforms policing often via algorithms. So, he asks the question, how come Crackpot with his anti-fluoride and anti-vaccine stuff gets to keep his stuff off on Facebook, and Lady making, slightly extreme but not totally crazy comments about socialism and environmentalism gets filtered by LinkedIn? It's because LinkedIn has a different algorithm than Facebook, and there's really very few human contacts to whom you can appeal. This leaves us as politicians in a bit of a quandary. I am now, for example, we're about to be studying C10, which is the amended Broadcast Act, which sets out to regulate streaming services, including Amazon, Facebook, and YouTube. What is the role for the government in regulating streaming services that come from another country? Is it something the Canadian government should even be trying to do? And I have used up more than my 5 minutes, but I suspect the three of us have many things to say to one another.
Thank you, Paula. So we're going to open it up to questions from any of you. So please just sign on and ask something. Perry, do you want to start with a question?
Boy, I would love to start with Paula, but I had a question for Doug right off the bat, and I think it relates to maybe all three of you. In the past, the professions received exclusive rights of practice from government because they had knowledge which the society didn't have. And bad knowledge floating around society was not something good in the health industry. So government gave exclusive rights of practice to the medical profession and said, regulate your members. And so they passed off the regulation of the medical profession. And this happened in engineering, it's happened in psychology, it's happened in many of the quote professions, including law, architecture, and engineering. So if a professional is certified as a doctor, and he's out there floating what you believe to be obvious, erroneous information about fluoride, just taking this one by example, why isn't the very body that has been empowered by government to protect the public, and that's the AMA, doing what it should be doing with this doctor?
Yeah, thank you, Perry. I think you're referring to me, this Doug.
Yes,
So
sorry.
I'll jump in and answer.
I'll call you Fluoride Doug from now on.
You can call me Fluoride Doug, and we'll have to come up with a suitable name for the other Doug too, that we can use in this crowd.
Yep.
Yeah. So to your question, I think that it's probably just a matter of time. I think that as this particular doctor becomes more and more bold in his statements and more out there, he's going to find his way onto the radar, and somebody's going to start to challenge him, and it could have some pretty serious professional consequences for him. As it happens, I was actually talking to a nurse in London, Ontario, who is an anti-vaxxer, and she has actually lost her job as a medical professional and lost her credentials for speaking openly about things that she ought to know better about. I like Dr. Bob. He's got a heart of gold, but I think if he doesn't watch it, his professional organization will probably shut him down at some point.
Well,
They won't silence him, but they may challenge his license.
We have the same issue, the other Doug, in retail. We used to have consumer affairs that would regulate when there was false news in the market. So the system in the past was we gave certain parties authority. So it wasn't government itself. It was more in the space of the NGOs, and said to them as trusted bodies, government will empower you to regulate the ebb and flow of knowledge in a society. Now, the new player in the game is algorithms, but I'll wait for Paula to raise that. So maybe Doug wants to step in about why consumer affairs isn't doing its job to help him.
Well, I think it's largely contingent on the issue that Paula brought up, that they're in foreign jurisdictions. And so if you're a website in, China, Alibaba or something, or AliExpress, and you're selling, I don't know, lead-coated children's toys and portraying them as, child-friendly, who's going to catch that? How are you going to catch that? How do you even intercept the purchase? It's fraught with difficulty, and the previous layers of self-regulation, I think, largely depended on a couple of things. One is domestic control, and two is some sense of social mores and social norms, both of which are largely gone. I mean, the light bulb kind of went on for me. This might be a little controversial, but for the first time when I saw Rob Ford up to his shenanigans at the time, rest in peace regardless, I thought, wow, mayors have only been behaving themselves because they decided to. We have no mechanism to do anything about it. What? And that astonished me, because I hadn't really quite understood the depth of the liberty that came with the position and the ensuing responsibility to behave or misbehave. So, insofar as products and misrepresenting products, unless there's a domestic lever, we can't get them, and there's nothing to enforce.
Paula, I was curious one thing, and I may be ignorant about this a little bit, but when you're talking about regulating something, what I've always looked at it is that instead of regulating against something, shouldn't we just be protecting free speech?
Well, I mean, I describe myself as a free speech libertarian, and I'm afraid the word libertarian has been appropriated by people whose politics are very different than my own. But if you consider me like a classic small L as opposed to large L liberal, I've always believed that free speech regulates itself. And I grew up, believing that Milton's Areopagitica was sort of my holy text. And Milton said, Milton wrote this great essay against the regulating and licensing of printing and books. And he said he could not praise a cloistered and a fugitive virtue, that he wanted people to go out and fight in the heat and the dust. And he basically made an argument, if you have good information, the good information will always drown out the bad information. And I believed that up until about, 3 years ago. And now I'm really worried that there is such a cacophony of bad information, whether it's like Doug Firby's doctor doesn't mean to be malicious. He thinks he's doing the right thing. So there's a whole category of people, we all have the aunt or the uncle who's sharing stuff on Facebook, and you think, oi, that's crazy. But they don't mean to be wicked. And then there are very bad actors out there who are purposefully polluting the information stream with information that is false and toxic, whether those are, white nationalist hate mongers or people who want to sell their vagina cleaning autoclave, or whether it's, it's the Chinese government or the Russian government. And it's very difficult, because if people don't have basic media literacy skills to be able to tell the junk from the good stuff, and at the same time, as Doug Lacombe explained, conventional mainstream media, which enjoyed great public confidence, is in an existential life crisis, whether that's newspapers, television, radio. So where do people turn for authentic, reliable information? If people aren't savvy about what they're reading and what they're seeing, it's very easy for them to be misled. And that's how you end up with the craziness of something like QAnon, where people start off on a site about naturopathy and holistic medicine, and the next thing you know, they're writing me to say, family members are writing me to say, is it true that Justin Trudeau is sacrificing children on the lawn at Sussex? I had to, no. I 100% guarantee you that Justin Trudeau is not sacrificing children and drinking their blood. I am 110% sure of this. You may not like his environmental policies, but but this is the problem. And people say, well, I read it online. Well, You know,
How do we know you're not part of the conspiracy, Paula? Maybe.
well,
How can
well,
we
you,
believe
well,
you?
you don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know. Um,
But
But-
you've touched on something here that I don't think, I think we need to really amplify it. You use the word existential. I am personally of the views that the most of the public is not paying attention.
Yeah.
They are very happy with the personalization of services that they're getting, that the algorithms and all of the rest are giving them information about what they want to buy next, that they are naive. In a democracy, the majority typically rules. And if the majority is not aware and informed, they, like lemmings, are going to lead us over the edge, and democracy will fall into the place of misinformation. So the trust and the existential crisis is an existential crisis about truth.
Yeah, and I mean, this is very alarming. And the thing that also alarms me, I want to clone Doug Lacombe and send him to speak to every government agency and every public body. People simply don't understand the days when newspapers had a license to print money. People say to me, "Well, what happened to the Edmonton Journal? Where are all the stories?"
But the scary
See,
thing,
that's the other part that I don't think people have taken time to notice yet. I mean, I look through my Google News feed and it's like, oh, superficial, heard that before, nothing new there. The other thing that people haven't discovered is that when newspapers and other legacy media have lost their resources, the quality of the reporting of necessity has gone absolutely down the toilet because the people, and this is not a reflection of the people who are still slaving away and doing the job, but they don't have time to do proper jobs anymore. They just don't have the time.
Now,
No,
I like to tell
I
people
mean-
that when I started at the Journal, and Doug will have the same sort of situation with the Herald. When I started at the Journal in 1995, there were 40 reporters in the city room, just news reporters. I'm not talking about columnists or feature writers or editors, 40 reporters. And now I believe the Journal has 12.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Cool.
they're great. I mean, there's some amazingly talented young journalists out there, but 12 people cannot do the work of 50.
And that's 12 people, including the Sun newsroom now.
Yeah, well, yeah, because it's one thing. I mean, because the Competition Bureau got hocused.
So I'd like to speak up.
Yeah.
so if we're,
Okay.
if we're, if
Oh,
we're,
sorry, Sharon?
go ahead.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, I find this all very interesting. The digital media and news journalism being the bad guy here, and of course, legacy journalism being the good guy here.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Or let me continue in that the discussion about thank you, Senator Simon. I'm not taking issue with what exactly you're saying, but I want to get my point across, which is to say the legacy media compared to community newspapers in my day were seen as the big fish eating the small fish. And they did not play fair.
That's
They
true.
did not play fair with advertising and they did not play fair with editorial.
Yep.
So
No.
we've now evolved 20 to 30 years and we're seeing now the digital media not maybe playing fair with legacy journalism media, and we're now looking at aghast as to what has happened. Yet we could probably take a look at what's happening in Europe and to see what's happening in the evolution of digital media and how we're all changing as a society. And maybe take some good examples of what is happening over there. And but the only thing that I think I agree with you, Senator Paula, is that the bots, the bots we should need to pay attention to. Let everybody express their opinions. That's what we're here for. We're a free society. Let that continue. But it's those darn bots that are not good. And if there's some way to get a handle on those bots and put in country approved regulations that can control that whole world, then I think that might help. In one area.
I agree with you, Sharon, that we should not be engaging in finger pointing. I mean, legacy media, let's not have rose-colored glasses about how legacy media functions. There were
But
lots
my question
of shortcomings, but we've got a problem now, and we recognize that we have a problem. And
Somebody was
how,
just
how do
trying
we
to-
solve that now?
Somebody was just trying to talk, but I didn't see who was it?
I think I was. My
Oh.
fear is within all of this, that as the anxiety grows among some that are concerned, like we're concerned. That's basically why we're here today. But there are thousands out there that aren't concerned.
Mhm,
And that the model that we will end up adopting is the Chinese model.
mhm, mhm.
Either the Chinese model or Trump model. That's the alternative.
No,
Hey,
let's focus. Let's not get distracted. Let's look at the China model. I mean, maybe China's got it right.
Pretty sure they don't. Uh,
Okay,
let's talk about it.
Yeah,
No,
I'm
but,
with Paul on that one.
No,
I have to interject on this one. It's Barry.
Hi, Barry. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Barry. I do most of my business that's left over the last decade in China. And I'm much more comfortable on WeChat as being secure as long as I stay away from certain keywords than anybody, and you don't get interrupted by any advertising or news, or they don't try and use WeChat as a news distributor. There's a whole bunch of government oversight, I guess, quiet government oversight that's never bothered me over a decade. And I've done business there since 1980. So, but my point is, don't rule them out because we are mad at them right now and we don't like their system. The guys south of us are 2 years away from the potential of losing their democracy because of what we're talking about and the impact of Trump. So
I've seen Michelle Zhang on this chat talking about her own experiences with the Chinese government, or I suppose not directly with the Chinese government, but she's put in the chat here that she got threats when she supported the demonstrators in Hong Kong on social media. Sure, I mean, intense regulation would mean an end to the cacophony, but then you have gatekeepers deciding what's true and what's not, and you may not want a government deciding to censor what you can read and what you can say.
When
I
we,
think if you were to take, freedom of speech is more like a continuum than an actual thing, a point on a thing. And from, you can say anything you want, including hate speech and misogyny, through to you can only say it if the chairman says, somewhere on there is a point that I think most societies can live with. So, I totally agree that there is comfort in having a semi-regulated, let's call it, channel, and that looking at all different manner of regulation can be useful and instructive. Having said that, there's two problems in democratic, or at least Western democratic societies. One is that unless you're prepared to make the CBC Facebook, so in other words, a government paid channel, you're unlikely, like somebody has to pay for this stuff. And that's why we're in some degree facing the global crisis that we have with social media, because they are all going public, they are all overvalued, they are all losing money, and so they are desperate to turn revenue in order to fund their communications channels. In China, just set it up, government's paid for it, done. So yeah, that's handy. But we may not like the outcome of that, where we, aren't allowed to talk about topic A or B or whatever. So finding a spot where we can live as Canadians with some constraints on free speech, and we've already, that ship sailed long ago, as it should have, that hate speech not allowed, threats of violence not allowed, and so on and so forth. So we've never had unfettered free speech. The question is, how unfettered are we prepared to tolerate? And I don't know the answer to that, or I'd be some kind of a legal genius, or maybe Michael Geist or something. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to pay for the servers and the gizmos that run all these channels. So what's the revenue model? And society has to take some stance on what's allowed and what's not allowed. I'll give you a concrete example. So just a few years ago, we were doing a bunch of work with Operation Lifesaver, which is a program for rail safety. It's been around since, I think, 81, and it's Transport Canada and the Railway Association of Canada. And at the time, I'm going to say it was roughly 3-4 years ago, the kids were running on YouTube what they called, or posting on YouTube what they called the Railway Challenge, which was basically teenage boys would go and roll under a moving train as on a dare, and video it and put that on puppy and put that on YouTube. And so we complained to YouTube, that it was demonstrating and glorifying illegal behavior, and they came back with doesn't violate our standards. How can it not violate your standards when there's trespassing involved, there's hazard to children involved, there's laws on the books involved about playing with industrial equipment that is not yours, but untouchable Google. YouTube didn't want to do anything about it, and so we were at a loss. And so, when you're in a safety program like that, it's like playing whack-a-mole. You could spend your whole life just going after people who are not interested in actually enforcing truth or honorable behavior or what have you. And so it is really challenging, and I don't think there are any easy answers, but certainly enhanced regulation is one of them, and breaking up the duopoly, I think, is another. That just like our old long distance rates, these guys have too much control, and we're not winning as a result of that.
Let me jump in there because I think there's one other factor, and Sharon McLean spoke to it. I think the idea originated with Senator Simons, and that is the bot problem. If it was just what was going on within our borders, I don't think this problem would be nearly as complex. Have at it, fight it out, figure out a way for journalists to earn enough money to keep food on the table, no problem. The problem is exterior forces are manipulating what's going on for nefarious reasons. That is the real threat to free speech and to our democracy, and we don't know how to solve that problem.
It makes us sound crazy. Like it makes us sound like, there's a evil forces of foreign agents are trying to infiltrate, except that it's true. And it's very difficult to know how you
Honorable news
counterbalance
doesn't
that.
sell.
Sorry, what was that?
Sorry, BK?
I said honorable news does not sell.
But but this actually speaks to a point. I mean, there have been studies done. MIT did some really interesting studies about what makes a post go viral. And posts that go viral, fake posts go viral faster. And it's not just because people don't want to read legitimate news. It's that people who craft those posts understand what pushes our buttons. If you see something that makes you really angry, something that plays to all your prejudices, something that makes you so mad you want to push the button and share it before you even read through it, that's when you have to get nervous. And that's when we all have to be our own self-editors. I mean, those share buttons are the most dangerous things, because we're having a real life experience of what it is to be in a viral pandemic right now. But that's the real thing. Meanwhile, we're living the metaphor. You might remember, you will remember a few years ago when there was a horrific massacre at a mosque outside Quebec City in Sainte-Foy, Quebec. And lots of people were, sharing information on Twitter about what was happening. And I saw a respected journal colleague, a former journal colleague at that point of mine, sharing a story with a Reuters news service logo on it that suggested that this was a crime committed by a Muslim. It was a Muslim gunman who shot other Muslims. This was, of course, a lie, a vicious, racist, Islamophobic lie. Did Reuters report that? Of course it didn't. What this Twitter account had done is to steal the Reuters logo to tweet out the fake news. And then even savvy former news people were retweeting it. And this is the kind of dangerous weaponization. As I say, I was perfectly happy to fight the trolls when it was like some guy, but now I don't know where this is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems, I mean, I see two scenarios. I see the scenario of our concern, many of us, of government taking authority inappropriately and, like China, regulating social media and telling the stories. And the other is that there is no, we accept that this is simply a phase, that people will learn. Like the Wild West, there'll be some people hurt. There'll be something uncomfortable. There will be much disrupted, but in time we will learn that social media needs to be watched very carefully, and that we as individuals will become more responsible. And to find that middle ground between overpowering government and running into a 1984 or unempowering it when we leave people at great risk, maybe the role of government in all of this is education. Simply to help keep people aware of where the risks are, not to play a regulatory role, but to play the role of being an informer about what is at stake here at the individual, at the community, at the family level. Paulie,
Harry,
I want to jump. Go ahead, BK.
yeah, most individuals are lazy. If it doesn't kill me, I don't care.
Well, if they still go to school, they still listen, they still learn. Human beings will learn. I mean, I've got to believe that is one of my faith principles, is that people in a democracy want to be informed. They want to learn. They want to learn whether fluoride works or doesn't work. They want people to step in and the AMA to make a statement on what AMA as a respected, credible force believes, without it being government, but expecting that these NGOs will play a stronger role in educating the public, so we don't have to empower government and run the China model.
Yeah, these are such difficult decisions to make. I mean, for example, when Twitter started in the wake of the January 6th attacks on the Capitol, and Twitter started actually bringing down the hammer on hate groups on Twitter. And suddenly all sorts of people just started disappearing. And it was, I thought, a good and wonderful thing. And then you think, well, now we've chased those people off Twitter where we could see them.
Right.
And now they're on some other website where I can't see what they're saying.
Mhm.
So it makes my Twitter experience more pleasant. But it's a little bit like, so there were some cockroaches in the kitchen. If I just shut the door, I don't have to see them, but they will still be there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we regulated marijuana. It seems to me we finally accepted the fact that maybe we've got to make it legal, so in fact we can address what's illegal.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on your idea, Perry, where you talked about we can perhaps educate people to be sophisticated enough to separate the wheat from the chaff, to sort through all that BS. And I'm sitting here, as you were talking about it, in my mind, I'm like, what scale of education would be required? How could we actually train people? Is it even possible to train people to be that sophisticated that they wouldn't be fooled by some of these strategies?
I don't
believe we can.
I don't think it's that difficult. If you started at the schools and you said to children, the education is a process, and we're going to teach you critical thinking, and you will grow up to make choices. And we as a teacher are not going to tell you right now what's right and what's wrong, but we're going to give you the means by which you can be and make critical judgments, which is the foundation of a democracy.
Yeah, but Trump again sort of blew all that away. He was, he would come in and he had 20 lies every time he said anything, and then he used Twitter very effectively to cover everything after that. And then he had all the top press in the United States analyzing and poo-pooing him, and yet they still couldn't curtail him until after that disaster in Washington, right?
But he didn't get reelected.
Yeah.
This is
was stolen.
I think that certainly is
that's the ultimate measure.
Yeah. Perry, where do we find the teachers that know right from wrong?
I didn't talk about knowing right from wrong. I talk about a process.
I think Perry raises a good point. I think media literacy skills have to be taught in the classroom, from elementary school with house hippos all the way up through university.
Sure.
And I do think that these things these things ebb and flow. We are in a period of extraordinary anarchy right now, and I think there will be a course correction. The question is, what will be lost in the meantime? And one of the things that I really worry about is the quality of discourse about what happens in government. Very small example, and I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me. I'm a big girl, I'm a politician now. I voted a particular way on a bill 2 years ago. I voted in opposition to Bill C-48. You don't even need to remember what Bill C-48 was. I voted against it because I didn't think it was good for Alberta. Well, people started an online campaign to call for my resignation because they said I voted in favor of the bill. I didn't vote in favor of the bill. I voted against the bill. And people said, well, prove. How can you prove that you voted against the bill? I said, well, I did it on live television. Here's the video of me voting against the bill. Here's the Hansard, which is the official record of me voting against the bill. And it didn't matter. And then, a former conservative MLA wrote a piece that got published about how Patty Labikin-Benson had voted in favor of the bill. And I emailed him and I said, but she didn't. He said, she did. I said, no, I was honest to God. I was standing next to her when we stood up and said nay, right? I mean, and I thought, well, this is a very illuminating moment here because as I say, it doesn't even matter what the bill was about. I couldn't convince people of the most basic literal fact. This isn't like a question of context or nuance. It's, did I vote in favor of the bill? No, I didn't. And for me, it was a real wake-up call because I thought, I'm perfectly prepared to get on social media and have a dialogue and a debate with anybody about a difference of opinion. I still don't know how to respond to people who simply will not believe a black and white, simple, basic truth.
That's kind of what I was
gap.
trying to get at. I mean, I think what I'm saying is, I absolutely agree that schools need to train critical thinking and media literacy to a much greater extent. I don't think that there is any level of education that's adequate to overcome some of the sophisticated tools of deception that are at work out there right now.
And I don't disagree, Doug. I mean, I position that so that we in fact are addressing options.
Yeah.
And I think the option doesn't have to be empower or not empower government. I think there are options. And I think we as a society have appreciated and valued truth. And we need to recognize that there are many organizations that are ducking this. And I cited the medical profession just by way of example, but I could cite many others. So I sort of start there. But the point, when Paula was speaking, the one word I wrote down was urgency. Is I am concerned about the algorithms. I'm concerned about the bots. This stuff that human beings have really no control over. And my recommendation is to split and to break up the oligopoly and regulate algorithms that you need a license in order to introduce an algorithm and separate that from the gathering of facts. Now, I know you have difficulty cross-border, but it seems to me someplace we're elevating this discussion to the point of getting into how do we regulate algorithms? This isn't even about human beings anymore, about organization, but when algorithms in fact have the capability to know you better than almost you know yourself and to start making decisions that you think are in your interest because it knows you so well, we're in really outer space territory.
Yeah, I had a meeting with the CRTC today, and I asked this very question. I said, so, if the CRTC steps in to regulate things like Netflix and Prime and Spotify, will you have access to their algorithms to see what how they're making Canadian content discoverable or not? And the guy laughed and he said their algorithms are pages and pages and pages of lines and lines of code. He said they're proprietary and they're the special sauce. And he said, sure, in theory, the CRTC might have the regulatory power to demand that they turn over the algorithms, but would they have the capacity to be able to analyze them to see what they're actually doing?
Well, that's algorithms managing algorithms.
Yep.
And let's not kid ourselves. I mean, this may be the environment that we're entering into, and it may not be too late to expect that we have a society where those that are evil And there are those who will spend their time to develop the thousands of pages of code that we need in order to manage the algorithm. I don't know. But I think
Sharon had a comment, I think. Go ahead, Sharon. Oh, you're on mute. Oh, there.
I think, oh, there we go. Yeah. To carry on with Perry's point, I think that's an important one. Again, who are the evil sources and who are not? But I'd like to see this, the conversations move into the three categories where they don't overlap so much, because the first category really is how we communicate today in societies around the world, how we communicate. And then the second, of course, category is all of that technology and AI approvals or not approvals. And then the third category is media literacy or journalism and how that reflects society. But if we swing back over to the first category, is how we communicate today is very different than it was even 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're seeing in Spain, we're seeing what they call socios, which is communities communicating with each other. Those are evolving now differently than perhaps letters to the editor did at one time. Instant messaging in Germany, a Spectrum newspaper out there. And gamification now, of course, is a huge rising communication tool that we are using to connect both contributors as well as subscribers. So how we are forming communities quite apart from news journalism and how we reflect opinions in society is a different conversation. And so if we move those up and understand which ballpark we're playing in, rather than getting confused, again, morphing everything together, that might help, in my mind.
I think that reminds me of a book that you guys might like. It's old enough now, 8 or 10 years old or something. Here Comes Everybody by Clay Shirky. If you haven't read it, read it. And the worst cold notes ever is that in the old days, so like 10 years ago, if I wanted to start a I love crocheting oil rigs club, then I would go to Safeway and I'd put, hey, anybody else like crocheting? And I'd run around and I'd ask some friends, and I would never gain critical mass with such a niche weird thing. Well, in 5 minutes, I can have any niche weird thing have a club and 10,000 members on the internet, no problem whatsoever. And so the nature of how we come together as communities is really changing, I think, identity and the ability to act collectively as a special interest group and therefore change legislation and society. I mean, while I definitely think that media literacy can and should be taught and often and throughout a person's educational career, I think this is like any other complex problem, because what we're really being susceptible to is social engineering. So why do these algorithms work? Because they give me more of the crack that you got me addicted on the first time. That's why it works, right? Now, sometimes that's good. Here's another song you might like on Spotify, Doug, because you like old guy stuff, and now you like this other old guy stuff. And I'll be like, oh, I like all the old. But that's exactly what it says. I'm getting your playlist. But and then sometimes I get the ads on Facebook for like Cadillacs with a Led Zeppelin song, and I'm like, oh my God, you people know me. And so that's all trivial and kind of maybe fun, or I'm being a bit flippant. But when you use those same psychological triggers to get people to vote or oppose or even just create chaos so that there's no consensus in society, that's a whole other ball of wax. And I think that's what we're facing here. So there has to be responsibility on the part of the individual to be literate and filter information. I don't have a ton of faith in people's ability to do that or their energy to keep up with it. I think you have to be careful that you don't have monoliths like Facebook being the principal source of news. So if you break it up, then you get, maybe 10 rivulets instead of one Amazon of nonsense. I'm not really sure how one would go about regulating bots. That's perplexing to me, but interesting. You know, certainly you can write artificial intelligence to recognize, hey, you know, this thing says that it's in Ohio, this Twitter account or whatever, but in fact, it's, you know, the IP address is in North Korea. Okay, but how much can you actually scale that up for mass populace use?
Sorry to butt in, but as I said earlier, most people are lazy. They don't have enough sense. As long as it doesn't kill them, they don't get involved.
But that mentality is very dangerous, BK.
How do we correct it?
That mentality says everybody is stupid, so let's not have a democracy. Let's have powerful thinking people at the top. I get very concerned when we say people are ignorant. I believe in market forces. I think people will learn. I think they need to. I think they need an education. I think they need to be informed. I think the role of government is not to take power or distribute power singly, but this educational process is fundamental. And if we think that people are ignorant, then educate them, but don't give government the power because the people are ignorant. That is trouble. You're asking for a totalitarian regime, and I'll fight that.
The
The
challenge
last
is
thing I
that
want is to give power to the government.
the challenge is that the technology itself, I don't want to say it's neutral, but I mean, the same things that make social media fantastic for organizing a democratic uprising like the Arab Spring, or like the democratic uprising in Belarus, or even the uprising here against plans to coal mine on the eastern slopes, are precisely the same things that make it great for organizing the attack on the Capitol, or organizing any number of other white supremacist rallies and groups. And this is the challenge, because what Doug Lacombe was describing, the communities of interest that build, can be absolutely wonderful. I mean, social media has been a way for people to reach out across the globe and connect, to find people who share their interests and their passions, to form communities, especially for people who have felt lonely and alienated. Suddenly, you know, they can have a bosom buddy on the other side of the world. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Unless, of course, the thing that makes them alienated is that they believe in a hateful philosophy, and now they found other hate people, you know, that they can quickly come together in a cancerous cell. And so, you know, we judge the technology, but in fact, all it's really doing is amplifying human nature.
Exactly. I mean, we've always had this problem. It's just bigger now. I mean, you know, book printing is the technology that allowed for Mein Kampf and also allowed for the Bible. So take from that what you will, but technology is, as you say, Paula, sort of neutral, but not, you know, you're still not supposed to publish hate books, right? So how do we not publish hate Twitter accounts?
But I mean, if you think about it, the invention of the printing press basically broke up the hegemony of the Catholic Church.
That's right.
Led to hundreds of years of religious wars in Europe, destroyed empires, right? I mean, we think books are great, but you know, we forget that, you know, the paperbacks that we read on the train come from a legacy that created a whole lot of chaos on the way to the kind of comfortable middle class reading culture we know now.
Transition is messy.
I think that's one of the things that I think we're getting at in this discussion is that we can't actually count on government to save us from this. There's no level of regulation that will actually turn the tide. Some of this just can't be stopped. So we're going to have to learn how to live with it.
So we've got three options. One, we're very nervous about empowering government to address what you pointed out, Doug. This is simply an amplification and we've got three options. We've got government as an option, we've got the individual as an option, and we have these NGOs which serve as intermediaries. The party that I look to, and the one I'm really curious about, is the role of NGOs, because I think we've understated the role that NGOs could play in this environment, because they take positions. But giving this to simply playing the ping pong ball between government and the individual, I think there's a third party in here. And I really would like to see a discussion on the role of the medical profession, the dental profession, the consumer advocates, I'd like to see where the NGOs evolve because they need to grow. That's the party, particularly in Canada. The NGOs have been relatively quiet. And this is an opportunity for them to play a helping role in society.
I have to excuse myself for a second to check on dinner. I'm just going to pause and you guys talk. I'll be right back.
And I'm going to have to say I have to bow out. I have to leave. So Perry, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to do this. And Doug can take over as moderator.
Okay, we'll have to do this again sometime, Gary. Thank you very much. But as you leave, does anyone want to pick up on the role of NGOs in this chaos that we're going into or suffering through right now?
Just a couple of thoughts initially on that, and that is that NGOs are trying to be heard. They're not terribly sophisticated at doing this. I think NGOs are not leading edge in this area at all. But that's part of what Doug Lacombe is an expert at, is actually helping.
But Perry,
I think you're reinforcing that point. They may not be sophisticated. If the point that you're making is they need to become more sophisticated, then I would agree. But I think we've got a party in here that we have ignored that could play a more significant role. Yeah. As it understands their constituents and that they get the power from their constituents. That's the chambers of commerce, the medical profession. There are many NGOs out there that should become more sophisticated.
Yeah. Perry.
Yes,
Perry. Perry.
I don't need to say yes, go ahead.
Sorry. What makes you think the NGOs know what they're doing?
I did. That's right. My very point is to back up Doug. It says they need to stand up and take a position.
I think ultimately we all benefit if there's a free exchange of ideas, that we curtail that as little as possible. It does require media literacy, or digital media literacy in this case. If you look at the current state of enforcement through, and it depends on what you like, I guess you have to distinguish between professional associations and NGOs. But I would say that the average person, if you said, is the AMA going to really enforce something against a member doctor unless they actually, left scissors in, raped and killed a patient? I don't believe it. I think they're going to cover up, right? It's the bond of the blue. It's the whole.
Then take the authority away from them.
Well, and so that's an interesting discussion. But certainly my observation is that these professional associations, separate and distinct from industry associations or NGOs, are, let's say, reluctant to enforce anything. Like, how often do you hear of a dentist losing his license, or a lawyer,
or a teacher,
basically they
or a counselor or a mayor.
Okay,
right.
So
or
Doug,
a senator.
That's the problem.
So Doug, we have been living through. You read the editorial. We've been living through the knowledge economy. The professions are empowered because they have exclusive rights of practice, meaning they had exclusive knowledge. We're now talking about truth. And we believe that the professions have a certain access to information that would give them a little bit more leverage than the client on issues of knowledge. So they're the very parties, the very ones that should be in the middle of this debate. And I don't think they are. So the government has two choices. They remind them that they have exclusive rights of practice because they have exclusive access to knowledge to pass on to society as teachers, one. And if they don't do it, then take it away.
But also, Perry, I think you need to keep in mind that we live in an age in which all institutions are being questioned at a level that we haven't seen in quite some time.
Right.
Do we trust the government? Absolutely not. Do we trust the legacy media? No way. And that applies to a lot of other institutions as well. The AMA. Do we trust the American Medical Association, the Alberta Medical Association? Not necessarily. We may actually, a lot of individuals may think, well, they're coming from a certain agenda, or they're too conservative, or they're just not smart enough, or whatever reason it may be. But people are not inclined to listen to them or believe them the way that they would have a few generations ago.
Perry,
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Barry.
Perry, the big challenge you've got, and I agree with trying to go the NGO route, but funding. They don't have the funding and their membership probably will not agree that we need to. They need to pay for that. So who's going to pay for it? My other comment on all of this is that south of the border, I mentioned it earlier. My big worry right now is coming up with the off-year elections. 2/3, I think the report last week was 2/3 of the states in the union are underway with legislation that will put everything back to the paper ballot. And the reason for that is that this last election was stolen. And the people, there's enough people believe that it's a very real possibility that we're even going to see that come whatever happens south of the border. How do we in Canada manage ourselves so that doesn't happen? I don't have the answer.
I don't think anybody does.
And well, I was going to say, I have a son who just recently retired as CEO of Shaw Communications, and I don't think he has the answer either. So I'll shut up.
But this is really, the Gutenberg analogy works very well. Before Gutenberg invented the printing press, before literacy became a phenomenon, knowledge was tightly controlled in Europe by the Catholic Church and by a very narrow cadre of nobility who could read. And the peasants were told, you only need to know what the church tells you. Once you started printing the Bible in a language other than Latin, once you started a penny press where you didn't have to be a rich person to own a book or to read a newspaper, there was this firestorm of literacy and cultural growth and wonder, and also extraordinary violence and the tearing down of all the centers of control and command and all of the sources of knowledge. So people lost faith in church leaders, if they lost faith in kings. I mean, we look back now and say, this was wonderful. This was the Renaissance. We forget that there were a lot of casualties along the way. And now, as Doug Firby has rightly said, people don't trust any of the conventional, traditional fonts of knowledge. We have become, and you can certainly see this in Trump's America, to have a university degree is suddenly makes you, it's almost like the Cultural Revolution. If you're educated, somehow that makes you dangerous and a class traitor. If you have any pretensions to knowledge, if you're a Supreme Court justice or a president of a university or the head of a law society, you are suspect. And it's very, very difficult. When I was in labor, transition, gentlemen, is the worst part of labor. They say to you, you're now in transition. Transition is very difficult. And we are in a transition from one cultural paradigm to a completely new one. And we all thought, I shouldn't say we, I naively thought it would be great if there were fewer gatekeepers of knowledge and if knowledge were more evenly distributed. And I thought, won't it be wonderful? Everybody can learn everything on the internet. You don't have to go to a university to learn important, beautiful things. Unfortunately, I think I miscalculated the human capacity for self-betterment.
But the genie is out of the bottle. Once the books were published and once the internet evolved, the genie was out of the bottle, and we're not going to be able to put it back in. And so we have to learn how to operate in a society where personalization is the power now. The algorithms will give you as an individual access to information that the doctor has, that you have about your body. You'll have it on a wearable. So how do we as a society that we've now achieved utopia, that the individual can know whether they have the critical thinking to know whether they're learning the right thing or not is another matter, which takes me back to education again.
Wow.
Because I think we are in a period in time, and I'm picking up on your point, Paula. This is indeed the Renaissance. This is what we all wanted. This is utopia. The individual has access to knowledge. We did some research 3 or 4 years ago with the professions in Alberta, engineering, doctors, teachers, lawyers, and we asked them, is the client changing? They said, absolutely. The client comes to us now as a consumer. They shop for information. They shop for a professional. They're not clients anymore. That was one step above a slave in Roman times. They're consumers. We have utopia, but we don't have the institutional infrastructure to manage it.
You know, we bit the apple and now we're naked.
Yeah, well, and that's an even better analogy. You know why Adam and Eve were kicked out of paradise? It was because God said, you have lost faith. You now want to know. So I think he said in addition, but you'll be back.
And you'll be lots of ads out there for clothing.
Harry, as you said, the genie's out of the box.
Maybe the pursuit of knowledge is not what it's all about. And that's where your sister and I get involved is what comes next? If we leave alone this issue of the transition and the confusion and the uncertainty, and we ask, okay, maybe the economy is going to be more of a creative economy. Maybe it isn't a knowledge economy anymore. Maybe that's free flowing. Where does all of this take us? If we want to think positive, can it take us into a better space?
Well, ultimately, I suppose if you, now this might be far out, but I think you start to see the end of nationalism. Because what's a border, right? Do I care where my t-shirt is shipped from? Do I care which legislative body? Do I even identify with something called Canada? And that to me is scary because, of course, I value all those things. But the fact of the matter is that, 20 years ago, I could be reasonably sure that stuff came from within the box that I identify with. And now stuff comes from everywhere and I don't know necessarily what's what. And so, whether you're talking European Union and passports and all these things, but of course, borders, persist long past their utility, and many of them just lines drawn by colonial powers. If you say, like, how do we become world citizens? And if we go back to the vaccine thing, it's because large groups around the world put down their swords, threw money in and said, okay, we're going to solve this. But then that opens up the crazy, the global corruption potential for, all the things that we think both good and bad about the UN or the WHO or whatever. And so we just change the problems from accusing Ottawa to accusing Zurich or something. So I think that citizens of the world is probably where this is going over multiple decades. But we're nowhere, we're barely one step into that journey.
Perry, I think we need one country and we need you as the president.
There we go.
But Perry, I was just going to say.
But I'm retired.
Perry,
but you're not retarded.
On a local level, I just feel nervous about using any sort of social network these days. Today I got a request from Rachel Notley to donate to the NDP party, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm waiting to hear from the UCP about this grant that I'm hoping to get. Now, if I give her $30, is that going to be monitored by the UCP and I won't get my grant? And these sort of things I've never ever thought about before in my life, but now I feel these things and I feel nervous about using any sort of social network.
Well, I feel nervous about people getting grants from government in general. But Jill, do you want to step in, Jill? But turn your mute. Okay.
I know. I get caught every time. I'm just fascinated by this whole discussion. And I keep hearing in the back of my mind conversations I've had with young 20-somethings. And they're not raising these concerns. And when I say, you don't even know the freedom you've given up, you don't even know the information you're putting out there, you don't even know who's telling you what out there, there is not the same sense of needing to, or there's just not the same level of care or concern that the information that's out there isn't potentially truth. They love the convenience. They love the things that freak me out, that I can be talking about something in a room and then get an ad targeted to my phone about the very thing I was talking about. The conversations I've had with them, that's fantastic. You mean I can go and get that information without even having to look it up because they picked up on my interest in it? So I'm finding there is a disconnect between our age group and the concerns we have because of our foundation in how we valued our sources of information. And then this generation coming out now that's certainly interacting with it much more than we are, at least certainly more than I am. And they don't share the concerns that I find our age group does more.
This is an excellent point, because when I talk to younger people, they tell me they look at Facebook as a source of entertainment, not as a source of authority.
Yeah, it's not. It really is their mother's internet.
John, you nodded your head there. John, you want to speak up there? John Berger?
Yeah, I do actually. Thanks. It seems to me we've identified that there's some real risks with too much external regulation on social media and these different service providers. But on the other hand, we see too little self-regulation within these providers. So maybe the answer here is some amalgamation between a relationship between external regulation that lays on a framework of accountability so that these service providers provide better self-regulation and demonstrate how they are doing that. And perhaps having a panel of participants or users who are part of that process. And I think of Wikipedia, and it seems to me that's one of the better examples of the internet, which is actually advancing human knowledge and intelligence. And it does have an internal process of self-regulation. You don't just add something to Wikipedia and walk away. It's reviewed and approved by a panel of experts who have some knowledge of that area. So I think there are good models out there, but we're just not seeing a logical, consistent application of how these service providers can, in fact, be held more accountable and should be held more accountable.
But if
the challenge for us as Canadian legislators is, what do we do? I mean, do we need to rely on American antitrust legislation? Do we need to rely on the American Senate to rein in Twitter and Facebook? And then the ones we don't talk about, like Jeff Bezos. I had no idea until Jeff Bezos shut down Parler completely that Amazon owned the servers, right? I mean, I knew Amazon had streaming services. I knew Amazon sold me everything. I didn't know that the internet, that they basically owned the structural rebar of the internet, and that Jeff Bezos could decide that Parler was an evil right-wing media platform and he was going to shut it down. And part of me was like, yay, you go, Jeff Bezos, because Parler is a wicked right-wing extremist media platform and you shut it down. And then as soon as that thought flitted through my mind, the next thought was, well, wait a minute, what if Jeff Bezos decides to shut down something I like? And I don't, I didn't really want to be in a public position of advocating for Parler, but I think it's very dangerous to think that there are a few, there's an oligarchy of very few powerful people who control the entire roadway of the global internet. And unfortunately, for me as a Canadian parliamentarian, I do not know what levers the government of Canada has to regulate giant corporations that are incorporated outside our borders, that are everywhere. And is Canada, Australia, the EU left in the position that we have to go cap in hand to the American government and pressure them to exert some force? I don't know, but I fear that is the only logical lever we have.
Well, like Narnia, Canada can be a real moral leader in the world and maybe provide some leadership and ask these service providers to come to the table to talk about how they can, in fact, be more self-regulating and more credible, because they're at risk of losing their credibility. Someone said that Facebook, users seeing Facebook as a more of an entertainment than a source of information. I view Facebook as just a pain in the ass, basically, because as a school central administrator, I used to see Facebook being used to undermine the credibility of some of the administrators in our schools. And I told our administrators, just sign off. Don't even entertain it. Don't even engage in it, because it's not a credible vehicle for conversation. So I bailed on Facebook at that point as well. I don't use it.
Can I share some of my opinions from what I've been seeing?
You will have the next to last word.
Yeah, because I think about the social media thing, like we talk about high school bullying in the past. It's actually already happens in the younger generations. My brother is a high school teacher. He find out the parents and the other teachers a little bit older, they cannot actually talk to the students, but only when you are on the social media and then you know what's going on there. But right now it gets so much attention just because of this pandemic, are pushing all those senior people online, and then all in a sudden you find out what kind of impacts going on. Because like in your generation, your school bullying is happening in the washroom, but here today it's happening on social media everywhere. So it's going to be going across the border everywhere globally. Like 2019, 2018, there were so many discussions in United States talking about split Google and Facebook. But they didn't do that because a strong reason is they find out if American has to stand against China or Russia, those countries have strong power to use the national assets to turn against Western countries. So they won't have any tools to defend themselves. And they will lose the front of the social media. But then Trump didn't realize that Google and Facebook come back and turn against him, right? So it's a sword, happens on both sides. If we don't have this weapon, then we will lose to the other enemies we didn't think they are enemies, we think they're friends, but they take you as enemies. So how are you going to defend yourself? That's the one problem. And it is a global effort. It can't be done by one country. And in the past, when I was teaching the kids on the Junior Achiever program, what we told the kids is to avoid to say something radical or reduce your presence on social media. But right now it is actually, even you are not on social media, people will put your picture, videos online. They will create lies across the world, and then you will be the last one who know it. And it gets more, it's amplified because of this pandemic. For example, right now, a few months ago, there was a Chinese girl. She caught a coronavirus, and the government find out her locations. Like one night she went to 3 bars, and then so they send out the news and tell people who have been to those 3 bars have to report it to the government so that to do the test to see if they are positive or not. But someone posts her pictures on social media and says she's a whore, she's a prostitute, and went to those bars to take after those clients or guests, whatever. And then she was accused by the whole social media. Everyone was mad. And then her personal information were all spread out. And then it turned out she was a low income family, and she has to work for 3 bars for part-time jobs. But, you know, like, I don't know what happened to her later, because the media doesn't care about that anymore. And this can happen to any kids or ourselves at any moment. Because you probably won't even know that what is going on outside, and all in a sudden your business, a group of people showing up in front of your business simply because social media said your business is racist. And then they will go to attack your business, and then they will post a video on the social media and call out more people to attack you. So this is the situation we have to deal with, and it becomes more serious. And also, like, today, those programs has turned so advanced. For example, on the social media, I use the Chinese social media to talk to my families and classmates in China. So it's called WeChat. They actually can set up that program, screen all my speeches in that group. Like, for example, I keep typing, I keep texting, and everyone within the Chinese mainland, they cannot see a word that I said. They cannot see anything. They just thought I disappeared. Wow. But indeed, I was talking a lot. So you're talking to the air, and then you find out no one's talking to you. And when you see the lies, you tell them that's not true, but they cannot see it. And then we actually did a comparison. So someone in Vancouver, she has an iPhone she bought in Canada. And then her husband has an iPhone he bought in Shenzhen. So that cell phone that was bought in China cannot see anything that I said. But the phone in Canada can see it. So can you imagine if they apply all these programs to our cell phone and computers? It's going to screen out all the things they don't want you to see.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter it's a government. It doesn't matter it's an NGO or corporation. Anyone can do things like that.
Michelle, I'm nervous enough. I've had my scotch. That will hopefully mitigate some of the anxiety that has been generated through this discussion, but we are over time now. There is really nothing more to say other than I want to thank Doug Firby. I want to thank Doug Lacombe. I want to thank Paula Simons for joining us and staying right through this. We weren't aware that you would stay beyond 5, but obviously
That's
the
right.
topic.
Well, I am a senator. I am also a wife and a mother, and I have to go deal with dinner and the dog. So.
Well, and that's where we are with the wrap up is like a good consultant. Good consultants ask good questions. And I think today has been more about asking some good questions than necessarily coming up with good answers. There is a macro issue that we're facing. It's transitional. But there's also the micro issue of this is a more personalized world. Every individual in society that has access to the internet can be a publisher.
Yep.
Yeah.
This creates an enormous.
If the Dougs and I had an answer to this, we'd be running the world.
Right.
But,
so I want to thank all of you. We will be skipping next week, the 26th. I'm doing a reunion for my former colleagues with KPMG Consulting. So we're going to skip next week. Early in April, whether it'll be a Friday or not is yet undetermined. But the topic early in Friday will be, there are numerous companies in Canada which have been very successful recently in selling off to the US. That is putting billions of dollars into Canada that could be used for helping us further our innovation ecosystem. I'm going to put a panel together of people that have actually sold their companies, that have done extremely well, and challenge them in terms of whether they are reinvesting those funds for further advancing innovation, or whether or not they're going to Arizona and buying airplanes and cars. So hopefully we'll see you in early April. In the meantime, thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Paula. Thank you all. And have a nice weekend. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.